The air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth and wilting flowers. Eleanor stood by the window of her small living room, staring at the gray world outside. The clouds hung low, heavy with the promise of another downpour, mirroring the weight in her chest. It was the day after her husband, Thomas, had died. A heart attack, sudden and merciless, that stole him from her in the middle of a quiet Sunday afternoon. The world had stopped making sense in that moment, and now, 24 hours later, it still hadn't resumed its rhythm. Eleanor was 62, with silver hair that fell in soft waves around her shoulders and eyes that had once sparkled with warmth. Now those eyes were hollow, red-rimmed from tears she couldn't stop shedding. Thomas had been her anchor for 40 years. They'd built a life together, modest but rich with love, filled with the laughter of their 2 children, now grown, and the quiet comfort of routine. He'd been the one to make her coffee every morning, to hold her hand during thunderstorms, to whisper silly jokes when she was upset. And now he was gone. The house felt too big without him, even though it was just a small 2-bedroom cottage on the edge of town. Every corner held a memory: the kitchen table where they played cards, the armchair where he'd read his newspapers, the garden where he'd spent hours tending to his roses. Eleanor couldn't bring herself to touch anything, as if moving a single item would erase him completely. Her daughter, Sarah, had arrived that morning from the city, her face pale and her movements frantic as she tried to take charge. "Mom, you need to eat something," Sarah said, setting a plate of toast on the counter. Eleanor nodded absently, but the thought of food made her stomach churn. Sarah was trying so hard, but she didn't understand. No one could. The grief was a living thing, wrapping itself around Eleanor's heart, squeezing until she could barely breathe. The doorbell rang, a sharp sound that cut through the haze. Sarah glanced at Eleanor, who hadn't moved from the window. "I'll get it," Sarah said, hurrying to the door. Eleanor heard voices, low, familiar, but tinged with something sharp. She turned, her body heavy, and saw Richard, Thomas's brother-in-law, standing in the doorway. Richard was married to Thomas's sister, Clara. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with a loud voice and a presence that filled rooms whether people wanted it to or not. Eleanor had never liked him. There was something about the way he carried himself, too confident, too quick to dominate conversations, too eager to offer help that always came with strings. Thomas had tolerated him for Clara's sake, but Eleanor had always kept her distance. "I came as soon as I heard," Richard said, his voice booming in the quiet house. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his boots leaving muddy prints on the rug. Clara wasn't with him. She was likely at home, grieving her brother in her own way. Richard's eyes landed on Eleanor, and she felt a chill, though she couldn't say why. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry about Tom. It's a damn tragedy." She nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you, Richard," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah hovered nearby, her arms crossed, watching him with a guarded expression. Richard didn't sit down. He paced the living room, his hands in his pockets, talking about Thomas as if he'd known him better than anyone. "He was a good man, Tom. Always had a plan, didn't he? I'll take care of things, Eleanor. You don't need to worry about the arrangements. I've already called the funeral home, got things moving." Eleanor's stomach twisted. She hadn't asked him to do that. She hadn't even thought about the funeral yet. It was too raw, too soon. I need time," she said, her voice shaking. "We haven't decided anything." Richard waved a hand dismissively. "No need to stress yourself out. You're not in a state to handle this. I've got it under control." Sarah stepped forward, her jaw tight. "Dad didn't want a big funeral. He told us that. We'll figure it out, Richard, but thanks." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Sure. Just trying to help. You know how it is, family steps up in times like these." Eleanor wanted him to leave. His presence was suffocating, his voice too loud, his assumptions too bold. But she didn't have the strength to argue. She felt fragile, like a porcelain cup teetering on the edge of a shelf. One wrong move and she'd shatter. The afternoon dragged on. Sarah stayed close, making tea, answering the phone, deflecting visitors who came with casseroles and condolences. Richard lingered, offering unsolicited advice about Thomas's estate, the house, the car. "You'll need to sell some things, Eleanor," he said at one point, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Tom's pension won't cover everything." I know a guy who can get you a good deal on the house. Eleanor's hands trembled as she gripped her teacup. This is our home, she said softly. I'm not selling it. Richard shrugged, as if her words were a minor inconvenience. Just think about it. You don't want to be stuck here alone, rattling around in this place. Sarah shot him a look. She's not alone. She has us. Richard chuckled, a sound that grated on Eleanor's nerves. Of course, kid. I'm just saying practical decisions need to be made. By evening, Eleanor's head was pounding. Sarah had convinced Richard to leave, promising to call if they needed anything. But he returned later alone, claiming he'd forgotten his jacket. The house was quiet now. Sarah had gone to pick up her brother Michael from the airport. Eleanor was alone, sitting on the couch, a photo album open in her lap. Pictures of Thomas smiled up at her, each one a stab to her heart. Richard stood in the doorway, his jacket already in his hand. You doing okay, Eleanor? He asked, but there was something in his tone, a shift, a sharpness that made her look up. I'm fine, she lied, closing the album. You don't need to stay. He didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes fixed on her in a way that made her skin crawl. You don't look fine, he said. You look like you're falling apart. Eleanor stiffened. I just lost my husband, Richard. What do you expect? He sat down on the couch too close, his knee brushing hers. I get it. It's tough, but you've got to pull yourself together. Tom wouldn't want you moping around like this. Her breath caught. The audacity of his words, the assumption that he could tell her how to grieve, ignited something in her. You don't get to decide what Thomas would want, she said, her voice sharper than she intended. Richard's expression changed, his eyes narrowing. Don't get snappy with me, Eleanor. I'm trying to help you. You're acting like you're the only one who lost him. She stood, her legs unsteady but her resolve firm. You need to leave. Now. He didn't. Instead, he grabbed her wrist, his grip tight enough to make her wince. You don't get to talk to me like that, he said, his voice low, dangerous. I'm family. I'm here for you whether you like it or not. What happened next was a blur of fear and pain. Richard's anger erupted, his words turning to venom, his hands to violence. Eleanor tried to pull away, to scream, but the house was empty, and her strength was no match for his. When it was over, she was on the floor, her body aching, blood seeping through her clothes. Richard was gone, leaving only the echo of his threats. You tell anyone, and you'll regret it. Eleanor sat there, trembling, her mind reeling. The grief for Thomas, already unbearable, was now tangled with a new kind of pain. Betrayal, violation, shame. She didn't know how long she stayed there, curled up on the floor, before Sarah and Michael found her. Their voices, frantic and horrified, pulled her back to the present. But the world she'd known was gone, shattered in a single day. The hospital room was sterile, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over everything. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, her body still aching from the assault. The doctor had been kind, her voice gentle as she explained the injuries. Bruises, a split lip, a cracked rib. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to leave Eleanor feeling like a stranger in her own skin. Sarah sat beside her, holding her hand, her face a mask of fury and guilt. Michael paced the room, his fists clenched, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting Richard to appear. I'm so sorry, Mom, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. I shouldn't have left you alone. Eleanor shook her head, though the movement sent a sharp pain through her chest. It's not your fault, she said, her voice hoarse. You couldn't have known. Michael stopped pacing, his face red with anger. I'm going to kill him, he said, his voice low and dangerous. He can't get away with this. No, Eleanor said sharply, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. No, Michael. That's not what I want. Sarah squeezed her hand. Mom, we have to do something. He hurt you. He can't just walk away. Eleanor closed her eyes, the weight of their words pressing against her. She wanted justice, yes, but the thought of facing Richard again, of reliving what had happened, made her stomach churn. She could still feel his hands, hear his voice, see the coldness in his eyes. The shame was a heavy blanket, suffocating her. What would people think? What would Clara think? Would they believe her? Or would they whisper that she'd somehow provoked him, that she'd misunderstood? "I just want to go home," she said finally, her voice barely audible. Sarah and Michael exchanged a glance, their worry palpable. But they didn't push her. Not yet. They took her home, cleaned the house, and stayed close, as if afraid to let her out of their sight. The days that followed were a blur of grief and silence. Eleanor moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding the living room where it had happened. She didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't talk unless someone asked her a direct question. Sarah and Michael tried to keep things normal, planning Thomas's memorial, handling phone calls, but Eleanor could see the strain in their eyes. They were grieving too, and now they carried her pain as well. Clara called a few days later, her voice shaky over the phone. "Eleanor, I don't know what to say about Thomas. I'm so sorry. Can I come see you?" Eleanor's heart raced. She hadn't told anyone about Richard, not even Clara. The thought of facing her, of seeing the woman married to the man who'd hurt her, was unbearable. "Not yet," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "I need time." Clara hesitated, then said, "Okay, but I'm here when you're ready." Eleanor hung up, her hands shaking. She didn't know if she'd ever be ready. The secret sat like a stone in her chest, growing heavier with each passing day. She wanted to tell someone, to let it out, but the fear of what it would mean for her, for Clara, for the family, kept her silent. Sarah noticed the change in her mother. One evening as they sat at the kitchen table, Sarah reached across and took Eleanor's hand. "Mom, you don't have to go through this alone," she said softly. "Whatever you're feeling, whatever you're not saying, we're here. Me and Michael. We love you." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to tell Sarah everything, to let the words spill out, but they caught in her throat. Instead, she squeezed Sarah's hand and said, "I know, sweetheart. I need time." Sarah nodded, but her eyes were searching, as if she could see the truth Eleanor was hiding. That night, Eleanor lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Thomas's side of the bed cold and empty. She thought of him, of his quiet strength, his unwavering love. What would he have done? He'd have held her, listened, fought for her. But he was gone, and she was alone with this new wound. The turning point came a week later, at Thomas's memorial. It was a small gathering, just family and close friends, held in the garden he'd loved. Eleanor stood by his rose bushes, their petals drooping under the weight of recent rain. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, her face pale but composed. She'd insisted on speaking, though Sarah had worried it would be too much. As she stood before the small crowd, her voice trembled but grew stronger with each word. "Thomas was my home," she said. "He was my laughter, my strength, my heart. He taught me that love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice every day to show up, to care, to fight for what matters. I'll carry him with me always." The words were for Thomas, but they were also for her. As she spoke, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt since that day's strength, buried deep but still there. She glanced at Sarah and Michael, their eyes shining with pride and sorrow, and she knew she couldn't keep silent forever. Not for her sake, not for theirs. After the memorial, as guests lingered over coffee and memories, Eleanor pulled Sarah aside. They stood in the kitchen, the hum of voices filtering through the door. "I need to tell you something," Eleanor said, her voice low. "About what happened after Richard came back that day." Sarah's face paled, but she nodded, her hand finding Eleanor's. And so, haltingly, Eleanor told her. The words were painful, each one a shard of glass, but they came. Sarah listened, her eyes filling with tears, her grip tightening. When Eleanor finished, Sarah pulled her into a fierce hug. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. "But you're not alone. We're going to make this right." For the first time since that day, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. She wasn't ready to face the world with this truth, but she'd taken the first step. And that, she realized, was enough for now. Eleanor's decision to tell Sarah about Richard's assault cracked open her silence, unleashing a torrent of emotions: anger, grief, shame, fear. She felt raw, but sharing her truth sparked a flicker of strength. Sarah and Michael became her anchors, their presence a reminder she wasn't alone. Sarah found a therapist, Dr. Ellis, whose calm voice helped Eleanor name her pain. "What happened wasn't your fault," Dr. Ellis said. "You don't have to carry it alone." Those words became Eleanor's lifeline. She started journaling, writing letters to Thomas, memories, regrets, promises to keep going. It didn't erase the trauma or her grief, but it made them less suffocating. The question of what to do about Richard loomed. Sarah and Michael urged her to go to the police, but Eleanor hesitated. Facing Richard, reliving the assault in a courtroom terrified her. Yet she knew silence could let him hurt again. One evening, Clara, Thomas's sister and Richard's wife, visited. Her face was lined with grief, her hands clutching a scarf. "I've been worried about you," she said. They sat in the living room, now rearranged to feel like Eleanor's again. Clara shared memories of Thomas, but Eleanor felt the weight of her secret. Finally she spoke. "Clara, I need to tell you about Richard." Clara's eyes widened as Eleanor recounted the assault, her voice steady despite the fear. When she finished, Clara was silent, tears falling. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I'm going to the police," Eleanor said, her resolve firm. "I can't let him do this again." Clara nodded. "I'll support you." The next day, Eleanor went to the police station with Sarah and Michael. Recounting the assault was grueling, but the officer listened without judgment. "You're doing the right thing," she said. Richard was arrested, denying everything, but Clara's testimony about his controlling nature bolstered Eleanor's case. The community split. Some believed her, others doubted, but Eleanor focused on her family and Dr. Ellis. In therapy, Eleanor tackled the shame. "You're defined by what you do now," Dr. Ellis said. Eleanor clung to that, finding solace in Thomas's garden. Pruning his roses, she felt his love, her resilience growing with each bloom. Months later, as the trial neared, she stood in the garden, the air crisp with spring. Sarah joined her, smiling at the roses. "He'd be proud," Eleanor said. "Of them. Of us." The trial loomed, but Eleanor felt stronger. The grief for Thomas was quieter, the trauma a scar but not her identity. She was Eleanor, widow, mother, survivor, choosing strength every day as Thomas had taught her. Thanks for watching.